work moment made your attitude go from proud employee to, I'm just here for the paycheck? Story 1 being the best at what I do, only to get passed by brown nosers. I'm there to work. I don't want to hang out. Edit. I'm not talking about a promotion. I'm talking about keeping the job. We slow down and get temporary layoffs until work picks up. The guys that take their break in the foreman's office instead of the break room, or play paintball with the boss on weekends, don't get the pink slip. Story 2. The cameras in the prison I worked at could be used to catch the first shower cabin in the women's and men's communal showering rooms on each floor. The cabins were basically this long row of shower heads separated by tall, opaque plastic walls and a half door in front. So if you walked in and an inmate was taking a shower, you'd see their feet and head, maybe shoulders, if they were exceptionally tall. But whatever fucknut installed that one camera on each floor made it possible for a top-down view into the very first cabin on that row. It took me years to figure that out. It never even occurred to me to try to move the camera that far. Once I came back from the women's floor and caught a male employee watching one of the female inmates taking a shower. When he saw me coming, he pretended he'd just accidentally pushed the little disco stick that moved that one camera. I didn't say anything to him, which I now feel ashamed of, but I brought it up with my supervisor. Was told to keep my mouth shut. I brought it up with another supervisor. Was told to keep my mouth shut. Then I thought, you know what? They can write off with this. If I lose my job, so be it. And went to the prison director. They reviewed a month's worth of tape, matched it up to that employee's schedule, and fired him. I expected to be treated like a traitor by my colleagues afterwards, but funnily enough, most of them were on my side. But yeah, after that, I went from, I like this job, to, just pay me and leave me alone. Watched the camera settings like a hawk, though, and made a point of telling female inmates to not use that first cabin. Edit. Thank you for the gold. Clarification. I am a woman, and I worked in a German prison, first floor female inmates, second floor male inmates. Our prisons set up a little differently than American prisons. For one, many German prisons nowadays employ private security personnel to do the minor stuff, accompanying inmates to the doctor, hospital, lawyer meetings, handling meal distribution, body life count. I was one of those, lowest rung in the ladder. My immediate superiors were what in America are the corrections officers, and in that prison they were a rather tight-knit bunch with a "we're better than you" attitude. There was, and still is, a very real chance that going up against any one of them meant losing your job. At that time, I really needed that job. For the record, I still do. Quitting there hasn't done me any favors financially, which is why I didn't say anything at first. I did go to the prison director within a week. I know that doesn't make anything better, but for me it was a decision between doing what's right and facing unemployment. It's no excuse, I know. If there is one thing in my life I'm ashamed of, it's that I had to think about doing the right thing at all. Also, of course, it's not okay if it's a male inmate. I honestly don't know if the camera thing was common knowledge. I asked. Some people said it was, some people said it wasn't. As a female guard, I wasn't allowed to have anything to do with the cameras on the second floor or the male inmates. In the 8 years I worked there, I was on the second floor maybe 10 times. 2 of my male colleagues told me they did what I did, warn the inmates. At the time I left, which was in April this year, there were plans to remodel the camera system in the whole building. Story 3. A few months ago, I had a come-to-Jesus moment with my boss. I always prided myself on being able to get my job done in the most efficient manner possible. The fact that I could run my department flawlessly and still put in banker's hours was something I thought was an example of doing my job well. Well, it wasn't. My efficiency was my downfall. The come-to-Jesus meeting was over the fact that I wasn't putting in 40 hours. Turns out that management's measure of doing a good job was how many hours you put in, rather than how much work you got done. So now I make it a point to show up a few minutes early, wave to the security cameras, and leave a few minutes late, waving on my way out. Story 4. When I was much younger and working in a factory, my boss found out I was going to college night classes. He called me into his office and demoted me from a technician position to a line worker. His reasoning was that since I was going to college, I wouldn't be around much longer, so he promoted a line worker to replace me. I knew absolutely everything about their custom-made machine. Shortly after he demoted me, it started to give them problems and eventually stopped functioning completely. He came begging me to fix it, but I told him to pound sand. I wasn't doing. And if he hadn't demoted me, the machine would have gotten the proper preventative maintenance and the current issue wouldn't be happening. I pushed a broom around the warehouse with the other 5 line workers for 10 hours a day, watching the idiot he replaced me with slowly destroy this house-sized multi-million-dollar machine over the course of about 3 months. That department of the company ended up closing permanently. Fuck them, that boss. TLDR. Boss demoted me. Factory closed as a result. Story 5. When I worked 170 hours of unpaid overtime in 6 months, lost our baby boy, took 5 days to recover, and my boss told me I had to take it out of my holidays. Fuck you, you heartless dead-eyed. Story 6. Doing a budget and realizing I only have $13 of disposable income after 40 hours of work and all my bills are paid, and being handed boring tasks and other people's work to do when I finish mine ahead of schedule because I actually know how to use a computer. Story 7. They hired a woman for a new positron and didn't tell the department until the day before she started. One of the guys in the department decided that if we were creating the position, he wanted it. They refused to work with her, told her to do things a certain way, and then complained to management that she was doing them that way. They were outright hostile to her. Completely set her up to fail until HR had no choice but to let her go as her debt wouldn't work with her. She's now homeless. There were no consequences at all for their behavior. Story 8. Getting a promotion with no raise. I was doing all the extra work for no extra money. That made me start to think about moving on when I'd previously loved the job. Then the husband of the owner offered to pay me, an atheist, to go to church and made a wise crack about my dying mom. That happened Friday, she passed Sunday, and I put my notice in on Monday. Started my own business in that field 3 weeks later, and I'm very happy now. Plus my new boss is fucking amazing. Story 9. No particular moment. Just the gradual chipping away caused by regular smaller things. Things like customers, shitty managers, lazy coworkers, never getting a weekend off. Starting early one day after finishing late the day before. Not having the required tools necessary to perform a specific task. Having to look busy even when there's nothing to do. This is more mentally tiring to me than actually having to work. Story 10. At my very first job being told I already got a raise. My raise was a state increase in minimum wage. So my raise was minimum wage to minimum wage. They would have paid me less if they could, but they legally couldn't. Story 11. Worked at Best Buy in college. On my last day, a lady brought in a 20-year-old rusty toaster to return with no receipt, and I wouldn't return it, so she called me a racist and asked for the manager. Story 12. When I was being bullied by people in the workplace despite doing my work, having a friendly demeanor, and always showing up, until the last couple of weeks of that contract, I got sick of it and scared for my mental health, so I took a couple of days during those weeks. I got fed up and told my supervisors. I was removing myself from the area those bullying me worked in, and I was going to do a massive clean of the huge freezer rooms for a couple of weeks. I think the worst part was they were okay with it and didn't try to resolve the issue of bullying. Everyone involved was a grown adult. It was pathetic. I tried letting my boss's supervisors know multiple times, but I always showed up and did my job well, so their bottom line wasn't affected, so they didn't see a problem. Story 13. After a year of sleepless nights taking work home with me, no weekends, and caffeine-related heart issues, my company held the end-of-the-year thank you award ceremony. We were all excited because corporate had rolled out new, incredibly expensive packages that we were forced to sell the out of. Selling them was hard and oftentimes sleazy and immoral, but my location got it done. Christmas bonuses for all. Nope. GM calls her 2 managers to the front and has us congratulate them on the trip to Acapulco that corporate is awarding the 3 of them in recognition of their leadership. Yay? One by one, the rest of us were called up to shake hands with management and presented with a generic mug with, "You make a difference," and the more you know shooting star printed on the side. No money, no bonus, just a cheap mug bought in bulk. I looked around the room and saw the realization that all the stress they endured and all the unethical they had done was for nothing more than a mug. I saw souls die a little that day. After that, I did my job, but screw lifting 1 finger more than I absolutely had to. Story 14. Working in a kitchen for a guy that has absolutely no restaurant experience whatsoever. The store I was at before closed down while I was on Christmas vacation overseas, and I was moving that summer anyways, so I took the job knowing it was easy money and I'd be gone in 6 months. But goddamn it, Rob. No, I don't need 3 giant tubs of pizza sauce for a Friday night. I have hella veggies that I will definitely run of because you didn't prep them this morning, but yes, I'll leave the line and make another fucking tub of sauce because you signed my paychecks. Oh, and during rush, you can just stand there and stare at the computer screen when you see me chopping peppers on the fly while my tickets are stacking up. Don't worry, bro. I got this. Dude even asked me how to make a few dishes when it was just him and me in the kitchen. Motherfucker, you added this to the menu yourself. You should know this. Yeah, I'm still just a little salty about that one. Kind of a fresh wound. Edit? Fuck. And when I try to bring in somebody with more than enough experience to replace me when I leave, boss man fires him and hires a crackhead to fill my position instead. Fucking shit, Rob. I'm done trying to help. Did my best. Later. Story 15. When my coworker, who cannot manage to operate the software she helps select, gets a 15% raise, and those of us who actually do the work got 1% because there's only so much to go around. Story 16. Had working at this bar about 7-8 months when this happened. I hadn't eaten all day and wasn't feeling well, and then couldn't eat anything before my shift. Told the day manager and supervisor I was feeling very sick and couldn't eat, and therefore couldn't work. Their response was that the Sunday prior, someone no-showed, and it was, so I had to work regardless. FYI, I'd worked that Sunday, and the only bad thing about it was that I couldn't have the early finish I'd been promised the night before. I assumed I'd get sent home when I started vomiting just an hour into my shift. I'd been in the kitchen just 30 minutes before, and we were still serving food. Nope. They needed the staff. On a Sunday night. Over the next few hours, I tried to keep hydrated. I also had a UTI at the time, while my supervisor tried to ply me with medication, which I didn't want to take, so I could make it through my shift. She gave me an anti-sickness tablet fizzing like crazy in some water and made me down it, then got annoyed when I vomited in the bin 5 seconds later. Despite the fact that A, you can't down a bomb shot's worth of liquid when you're sick, and B, I don't like fizzy drinks, so even if I hadn't started vomiting at that point, I'd have had the same reaction. After 3 hours of vomiting, she told me I was going to the toilet too much and banned me from drinking water. I was running to the toilet to vomit because I'd been banned from vomiting in the bin behind the bar and knew that if I vomited in one of the sinks, I'd be forced to clean it up, which would make me even more ill. I was losing lots of fluids because I was vomiting and had been told by my doctor to stay hydrated anyway because of my UTI. She gave me a bottle of tonic water to drink instead because it has like 0.5% quinine in it. Again, I don't like fizzy drinks, and tonic water tastes like carbonated water. I vomited after every sip I took. 6 hours into my shift, this supervisor decided that she was going to have the early finish. I had spent the majority of the shift clinging onto the bar so I didn't fall over. I kept falling asleep, even if only for a second, every time I vomited and while stood at the bar. My supervisor knew this, as she'd been working with me the entire time, and I even told her I was so out of it I was falling asleep standing up. I ended up doing a 9-hour shift where I was vomiting for 5 of those hours, and when I complained about it to the night manager, who started 2 hours after I started my shift, he said that he hadn't noticed I was ill. So, neither the day manager nor the supervisor had informed him when he arrived that one of his staff was violently ill, and how could he not notice when there were only 4 of us working that quiet Sunday night? Safe to say I left there about a month or so later. Story 17. Before cancer, I was wanting to become an assistant manager, but I was passed over. After cancer, I just want to work again. So I went from proud employee to here for the check to proud again. Story 18. When I brought up a concern and my 2 direct bosses laughed at me. No shame in quitting that place and fucking them out of a 5-6-figure contract. Story 19. Worked retail at a store that was open until midnight, so we would usually be done, and going home around 1 a.m. This was while I was in college, so during finals week I would plan with management to make sure my shifts ended by 10, so I could study before going to sleep and still be rested for the exams. I had approval for all this, and when the schedules came out, I was the only person who worked every closing shift for the entire week, and management told me it wasn't their problem, and I had to find people to cover the shifts. I told them that it had been approved, so by company policy it wasn't my issue. Well, management held their stance and told me it was my problem. So the first night came along and I worked until 10, walked up to the manager and said, "You need to find someone to finish the rest of my shift. Oh, and someone to cover the rest of tomorrow's shift. In fact, find someone to cover every shift of mine." And I walked out of the store, finished my exams, and then for the summer went to California to spend time with my father and enjoy some freedom. Came back after the summer to a job lined up working with dogs instead and was super happy with it, really. Last I heard, the store I walked out of had all the management fired. Story 20. I'm in the military. I was leaving on a long convoy when my chief warrant says, "Be safe." I nod. He then states, "Seriously, if one of you is hurt or killed, it will be the end of my career." Made me want to wreck that truck. Story 21. When my manager started drinking 150 proof in the back and convinced me and my fellow employees to get on the roof for a good 30 mins. Left only 2 people to run a front line, drive-through, kitchen, bakery. We were looking down at the 10-plus cars backed up in the drive-through, waving an LMAO. Cops came in shortly after asking questions. Worth it, but made me realize how unprofessional I can be at that certain workplace. Story 22. I was told a person was being hired to work a parallel role, not take my role. Then when they were approved to work, there was suddenly a bunch of reasons to demote me, including complaints from a person I got fired for sleeping, that I was targeting them. Also, they said I followed rules too closely, but also was not willing to bend rules for workers. Story 23. Chefs constantly whittling down my work self-esteem to the point where I do it perfect enough and the obvious, rampant favoritism. It doesn't matter how hard you work. You won't get recognized unless you're a brown noser. God, I hate culinary politics. Story 24. My boss taking away a stool behind the counter because she thought the cashier sitting down looked bad. We're a barely frequented overpriced tourist shop. I was basically expected to stand in one place for 5 hours to complete the look she wanted. Story 25. A manager who started working at our store. Imagine the biggest, more pretentious, condescending, by-the-books, my word is law, arrogant piece of you can imagine. He will yell at you for doing something he doesn't like or agree with. He will yell at you for bending the rules even slightly, even if what you did was more efficient and faster than the way you're supposed to do it. He threatens talks with people who don't do things his way, and they have too many talks. That person will be fired. I started working at my job just over a year ago, and within a month of him starting here, at least a third of the people who had been here for 5+ years were fired or quit because of him. Now add a gay lisp. Story 26. All my coworkers got months and months of training. I got none. I was expected to figure out opening on my own a few days ago, and now they're expecting me to train someone to open in a few days. My boss must think I magically know how to do everything. Story 27. Story 1. Back in 2013, there was a major flood that kept us from getting into the office for 2 weeks. Many of my coworkers were forced out of their homes for days. Others, like myself, were helping friends clean up their homes. A few weeks after our offices reopen, the president, who's in an office on the other side of the country, sends us a half-assed email wishing us well. And also, we were required to use our vacation time to cover lost time. Most of us went from loving our company to hating it nearly instantly. While many of my coworkers noped out of the company, I just decided to half my job for another 4 years. Finally changed jobs last year. Story 2. In my previous job, I was forced to take vacation time instead of being allowed to use my sick days as bereavement time during the final days of my dad's life and funerals arrangements. Asses. Story 28. I had to miss 2 days of work for my great-grandmother's funeral. Boss seemed cool and understanding of the situation. I told her what was going on Thursday night. Things weren't looking good, so I tried to let her know ahead of time. And on Friday, when my great-grandmother did pass, it was finalized that I was going to be out the following Monday and Tuesday for the funeral, which happened to be the week of Thanksgiving. Wednesday rolls around and I'm back at work. By noon, everyone except me and the receptionist has left work to catch flights, celebrate Thanksgiving early. All of my work is done by this point, so I text my boss, who had logged off for the day, she was working from home, to ask if it's okay if I peace out a little early too, since my boyfriend and I were trying to drive to North Carolina that day. She tells me that I need to stay until 3 p.m. because I missed Monday and Tuesday, and that it wasn't a holiday, so it's a privilege that anyone gets to leave early at all. Now, normally, this would be understandable, except 1. There was no more work to be done for the day. Even stuff I was working ahead on was done. 2. She didn't let me know that I needed to stay that long until I asked to leave, which seemed really unfair considering everyone else had already left. 3. I didn't miss work that week because I was sick, or because I was on vacation, but because I was at a funeral. That was the beginning of the end. A few months later, I found out my parents were taking me to Hawaii for Christmas, so I told my boss I would need to use 8 of my 14 vacation days. This was in April when I told her, a good 7 months before the trip. She called me disrespectful several times for going behind her back to schedule the trip and flights without talking to her first. She even asked if I was definitely going, implying she wanted me to cancel the trip because she wasn't cool with it. I quit not long after that. Best decision I ever made. Story 29. I busted to get my job done in order to finish another employee's job. Then she took credit for it in front of the boss during a meeting, even though the supervisor at the time knew she was lying through her teeth, and he didn't say a fucking word about it. Then, she used her kids and her disease for an excuse as to why she doesn't do her job. Everyone else on the job has kids, except for me, and they don't use them as an excuse, and I have a disease and I still manage to get my work done and her work done. She quit, but after that whole ordeal she put me through, I fucking hate my job. Story 30. When hard work went unrewarded and the owners openly bragged about much money they made, yet never showed up. Only way to advance is to be related to them. So why work hard when I know at best I might get a 5-cent raise? I do the minimum of requirements and try to find a better job. Story 31. Promised 2 weeks paid vacation after a year. The year passes, it's 1 week. I tried to fight for the 2 weeks, but they insisted that if it wasn't in writing, they weren't changing it. Really sapped my motivation to excel. I didn't slack or do a bad job afterwards, I just didn't worry, at all, when went wrong. Story 32. Worked more efficiently than others due to not being a complete idiot at working with computers and knowing how to Google stuff. In other words, being just like anyone with half a brain. Ended up getting more work and occasionally working late or on weekends. One day, I left the office after office hours like any normal human would. Boss was not pleased and had an hour-long lecture that lasted late into the evening when I was back at work. Told him I was preparing shopping for a friend's birthday on that day, and he said I was lying. Story 33. I was working in the kitchen at a popular Italian restaurant chain on a super busy night. Something like 60 people were sat at once, and the kitchen was getting backed up because the pass needed to have a manager tray up the plates. Of course, the manager was in the office, busy doing manager stuff. He walked by at one point. There's a pyramid of plates waiting to get sent out, and I said the kitchen was going to be super in the weeds if that food doesn't go soon. For those who don't know by now, the heat lamps in the pass will turn food to rubber after 5 minutes or so. The manager asked me why I cared so much about what's going to happen to the food. I'm not the who paid for it, I just made it. I told him I do care, that's why I applied in the first place. Maybe you shouldn't care so much about your job and just do it. I walked out and called the GM first thing the next morning and asked to use the open door policy that the handbook said was available. I also refused to come to work till the issue was sorted. I was told she was busy and she would call me when she had time. Of course, I never heard from her again. I feel that I should include that I volunteered for anything they asked. 5 a.m. truck, you get an hour to put up and come back for your normally scheduled shift every week. I honestly fell for their of Best Place to Work awards. Story 34. One of the assistant managers bitched me out for asking her to change to my availability hours. I was always the first person she called to handle someone's shift, and for 6 months I did the job of a department head despite being a part-time employee. I was tired of hauling from my college classes to get to work on time, and despite being given permission to come in 5 minutes late, was written up for being late. Then later, when we got a new store manager, he couldn't figure out how to work the closing software, wouldn't let me help him with the computer, and made me stay till midnight. The man literally couldn't figure out how to reliably left-click. After I put in my 2 weeks, he pretended like I wasn't going to finish up that 2-week period and had an assistant manager up the entire time, which I actually didn't mind all that much because I had worked long enough and reliably enough that I was fairly good friends with the closing assistant managers. Story 35. Working in aged care, I spent an extra 5 hours per week, didn't get extra pay, so had to rush to complete usual workload in less time. For 7 weeks training staff from other disciplines in how to move, handle old people safely, appropriately. They continue to do it the wrong way, often causing bruising injuries to said old people who can't speak up for themselves due to dementia and other illnesses. All the while, giving me attitude if I try to correct or help them do it correctly. FML, I need to change job. Story 36. I'm training my new boss because my old boss basically gave a 2-week notice and bounced. Oh, this was also after I was offered that position, which was reneged shortly after. Story 37. Oh boy, lots of things. Everyone else gets to go on vacation. I'm losing my PTO because they won't let me use it. I've been passed up for a promotion. When I asked why, I was told I was only 18, and I get emotional, which is a complete BS answer because they promoted an 18-year-old the year before. And one of the old night supervisors had an actual panic attack in the deli and had to go home. The other one had severe anxiety and routinely vomited in the bathroom when she got nervous. I'm too emotional because I ratted on my AGM when she broke the law and shouted at an ex-employee for picking food up off the ground and trying to give it to a customer. I've been there for 2 years. They always have me working when BRFSRA come in because I check every code and deep clean everything. But I'm being paid $2 or $3 less than my coworkers with the same position. One girl only started 2 months ago and makes a whole 275 more than I do. I've never been late. I've never called out. But the thing that was the tipping point was when they asked me to train a girl to pass me up for night supervisor because I've run shift before and already know the stuff. Story 38. I worked at a coffee shop for a while, and definitely when I getting screamed at in front of a group customers for not handing the coffee to the customers the right way. Also when we would routinely run out of coffee and had to explain to the customers that our boss didn't know how to stock his own shop. Story 39. I work alongside the boss's kid. They get paid more than me to do a similar job. And they regularly take long breaks, make decisions, and never do anything wrong. I tried to implement things in what I call the honeymoon period. Every idea was shot down, and I just gave up caring after that. I do the bare minimum, and do the job well enough that I fly undet the radar. Never give an opinion and just go about my job with minimal effort. Story 40. Work in IT. People being really rude and demanding when we're trying to fix their problems. Also not answering our questions but just sending more angry, panicked emails. Story 41. About 2 weeks ago, I got reprimanded for pointing out severe error in some new software we are being forced to use at my work. Basically, the guy who is implementing it is a Naval Reserve officer who loses his mind and gets extremely confrontational whenever anyone points out problems with this new program. Now here is where this gets sketchy. When he is not acting as a military officer here, he works for the company that developed the software we are using. Blatant conflict of interest, yet every time anyone brings it up, we are told to shut up and deal with it. I have been at work all weekend, and so far I have spent most of that time reading a new book at my desk or browsing Reddit. Fucks given, Mas Zio. Story 42. I used to put in a great amount of effort and always filled in when people called out, plus I would stay extra hours. Then when I unexpectedly had to take the weekend off for a funeral, management lost their minds, and my coworkers reacted by ostracizing me because they had to work a little later. It was disgusting. I'm so glad to be out of there. Story 43. Working my off in this position only to uncover a large amount of messed up stuff and never feeling like you're even making a dent. Now, I'm just there to make the day move, and not so much to solve every single problem that I need to address. Story 44. It's less of a work moment and more of a college work moment, but relevant, regardless. Basically, I'm in a team for my senior project. It is sponsored, so there is a company that keeps us accountable for our time and requires regular reports and whatnot. That's not too much of a big deal. I basically think of it as an unpaid internship without the extra hours because we are developing a commercial product to be refined later by our employer. Another way to think of it is unpaid labor masked as college work. Unpleasant either way, but it is tolerable for the degree. The project itself requires us to make a voice assistant app. There are many tools to learn, and I'm generally excited to learn new things in my major, so I just go along and try my best. Next thing I know, the affiliated company wants us to skip our winter break, which is a full month. Not only that, they want us to meticulously record our time and expect us to work 15+ hours per week, even on regular school weeks. Keep in mind, we're college students, so some of us have part-time jobs, and all of us have class time, homework time, etc. Fuck that. From that point, I put in minimal effort. What's the point in even trying my best for absolutely no benefit at all, and getting exploited extra hard? Welcome to American college. Hard work begets hard work, not success. Success is for people who know how to play the system. Story 45. I worked at a big box store for 5 years, which meant I got 3 extra holiday days a year. I then transferred to another store for a little while, all fine. After 6 months, I transferred back, at their request I might add. They screwed up the transfer. I got entered as a new employee, so I lost those 3 extra holiday days. They said there was nothing they could do. That's when I stopped caring. Not long afterwards, they cut my commission, banding-based, because I failed to meet sales targets. This cost me 313 a month. I failed to meet sales targets because I was spending 3 out of 5 days at the service counter covering. Again, at my boss's request. Same boss cut my commission. And sad to say, I stayed there 7 years in total. Such a waste. And there are so many other ways in which they screwed their employees. Story 46. When work moved me across the country against my will and wouldn't let me transfer back to be with my critically ill daughter before she died. I was never a proud employee to begin with, but I've definitely only been there for the paycheck since that. Story 47. Took a job at a reduced salary due to them questioning my background in the field. They offered a review at 6 months. Turns out I was right and my experience wasn't an issue. But no, haven't been there long enough for a pay rise. New rule. Also cut part of my vehicle allowance with no warning. Oh, and canceled the Xmas party. Oh, and finally, this year is one of the most profitable ever. Period. Story 48. I can't pinpoint the moment I started despising my workplace, but what has recently set me off is managers giving shitty customers what they want, or siding with the customer when they dispute the price or product or some such. It's ridiculously embarrassing when the customers who were wrong get validation from the same managers that push us to follow the very policies they just broke to appease a self-entitled. It's past time we stop catering to customers. Fuck anyone that thinks the customer is always right. They are wrong the majority of the time, and God help the wrong ones that give me lip. Story 49. When I was a delivery driver, at one point my boss got it into his head to make me clock out when I was not actively delivering pizza or doing dishes. A big part of the job was cleaning dishes, and I was pretty good at the mindless task. But this change meant I made more money doing them lazily. So that's what I did, and he didn't like that. Story 50. As a call center employee, we all started bright-eyed and feeling like we're making a difference by helping people through their problems. Everyone's spirit slowly breaks, little by little, with every call we take. At first, you think, it's fine. That guy was just having a bad day. Next one won't be so bad. Eventually, we all hit that bottom line where we just altogether stop caring. Everyone comes to it at a different point in their careers, some even waking up and deciding to leave before their spirit is entirely broken. I personally broke after 3 weeks, still trapped in customer support 5 years later. Story 51. When I was told that more was expected out of me than other employees because I have a better work ethic than them. So I'm supposed to sit here, bust my and cover 3 positions because your hires are incompetent and you're afraid to tell them to shape up? Okay, makes sense.